The morning mist hung low over the Montana Valley when Jonas Bradley first saw her, a silhouette against the pale dawn sky with a basket tucked under her arm, moving between the chicken coops like she was dancing to music only she could hear. He had ridden through the night to reach the small ranch outside Challies, his horse exhausted, and his own bones aching from weeks on the cattle trail. The year was 1884, and Jonas had been working as a ranch hand and cowboy since he turned 16. Now, at 26, he had seen enough of Montana territory to know when something or someone caught his attention in a way that mattered. The woman moved with such grace and purpose that he found himself frozen in his saddle, watching her reach carefully into the nesting boxes, speaking softly to the hens as she collected their eggs. She wore a simple blue dress that had seen better days, her dark hair pulled back in a loose braid that fell past her shoulders. And even from this distance, Jonas could see the gentle smile on her face as she worked. The chickens clucked and fussed around her feet, but she seemed unbothered, completely at peace in this quiet moment before the world fully woke. Jonas cleared his throat and urged his horse forward, the animal's hooves crunching on the gravel path. The woman looked up sharply, one hand instinctively going to her chest while the other tightened on her basket. Her eyes, he noticed as he drew closer, were the color of honey in sunlight. "Morning, miss," Jonas said, touching the brim of his hat. "Didn't mean to startle you. I'm looking for Thomas Ashford. I was told he might have work for a man who knows cattle." The woman studied him for a long moment, her initial fear fading into cautious assessment. She had a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and a few wisps of hair had escaped her braid to frame her face. Jonas thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "My father's in the house," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "He's expecting someone, though he didn't say when they'd arrive. You must be Jonas Bradley." "I am," Jonas said, surprised. "And you are?" "Prudence Ashford," she replied, setting her basket down gently on a nearby fence post. "My father mentioned he'd written to a man in Helena about hiring help. Our ranch hand left 3 weeks ago to try his luck in the gold fields, and we've been managing on our own since." Jonas dismounted, his legs protesting after so many hours in the saddle. Up close, he could see that Prudence was probably in her early 20s, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often. There was something about the way she held herself, a quiet strength mixed with genuine warmth, that made his heart beat a little faster. "Well, I'm here now," he said, then felt immediately foolish for stating the obvious. "I mean, I'm ready to work. Been handling cattle since I was old enough to sit a horse properly." Prudence's lips quirked into a small smile. "You look like you've been handling them all night. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday, I reckon. Maybe the day before. Time gets funny on the trail." She shook her head and picked up her basket again. "Come on then. We'll get you fed and you can talk to my father. He's not much of a morning person, but food usually improves his disposition." Jonas tied his horse to the hitching post near the barn and followed Prudence toward the house, a modest 2-story structure with a wide porch that had seen better days. The ranch itself wasn't large, maybe 100 acres from what he could see, with a decent barn, the chicken coops, and what looked like a small vegetable garden behind the house. It wasn't much, but it was well maintained, the kind of place built with care and maintained with love. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and wood smoke. The main room served as both kitchen and living space, with a large table dominating the center and a cast iron stove radiating warmth in the corner. A man sat at the table, his gray hair sticking up at odd angles and his face creased with sleep. He looked up as they entered, his eyes sharpening as he took in Jonas. "Father, this is Jonas Bradley," Prudence said, moving toward the stove. "He rode through the night to get here." Thomas Ashford stood, and Jonas saw where Prudence got her height. The man was tall and lean, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades working under the sun. His handshake was firm, his eyes assessing. "You look half dead," Thomas said bluntly. "But my daughter's right, you're here, and that's what matters. We need help, and we need it bad. Lost 60 head to rustlers 2 months back, and we've been trying to rebuild. Can't do it with just the two of us." "I can handle whatever you need," Jonas assured him. "Cattle, horses, fence work, whatever it takes." "Good. Pays $30 a month plus room and board. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse, meals with us. Works hard but honest." Thomas sat back down heavily. "Prudence, that coffee ready?" "Almost," she said, cracking eggs into a pan with practiced efficiency. Jonas found himself watching her move around the kitchen, noting the way she seemed to know exactly where everything was without looking, the comfortable rhythm of someone completely at home in their space. "Sit down before you fall down," Thomas told Jonas, gesturing at a chair. "Tell me about your experience." Jonas sat gratefully and launched into his history, working ranches across Montana and Wyoming since he was 16, learning the cattle business from the ground up. He'd done everything from breaking horses to driving herds to market, surviving harsh winters, and dealing with rustlers and wild animals. Thomas listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that showed he knew his business. Prudence set a plate in front of Jonas, piled high with eggs, bacon, and thick slices of bread. The smell alone made his stomach growl audibly, and he felt his face heat with embarrassment. She just smiled and set down a cup of coffee so strong he could practically stand a spoon in it. "Thank you, Miss Ashford," he said quietly. "Prudence is fine," she replied, serving her father before taking her own seat. "We're not much for formality around here." Jonas ate, trying not to wolf down the food despite his hunger. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy, and the bread fresh. It was simple fare but prepared with care, and after weeks of trail food, it tasted like a feast. "We've got about 40 head right now," Thomas was saying. "Used to have nearly twice that before the rustlers hit. I'm getting too old to do the heavy work myself, and Prudence, bless her, does more than any woman should have to, but we need someone who can handle the cattle, repair the fences, and keep watch. Those rustlers might come back." "I can do all that," Jonas said between bites. "And I'm a light sleeper. Anyone comes around who shouldn't, I'll know it. Good." Thomas nodded, then winced and rubbed his left arm. Prudence's eyes sharpened with concern. "Father, is it your arm again?" "Just stiff," Thomas said, but Jonas noticed the way he favored it, the tightness around his eyes. "He took a fall from a horse a month back," Prudence explained, her voice tight with worry. "Landed hard on his shoulder. It hasn't been right since." "Won't be right till I stop using it," Thomas grumbled. "Which I can't do until we get this place back on its feet. That's why we need you, Bradley. I can still manage the accounts and make the decisions, but the physical work is getting beyond me, much as I hate to admit it." Jonas understood the pride in those words, the difficulty of accepting limitations. He'd seen it in other ranchers, good men who'd worked their whole lives and hated watching their bodies betray them. "I'll handle whatever needs doing," Jonas said firmly. "You just point me in the right direction." After breakfast, Thomas showed Jonas to the bunkhouse, a small building with 4 beds, a stove, and not much else. It was clean and dry, and after sleeping on the ground for weeks, Jonas thought it looked like paradise. He unpacked his meager belongings, washed up from the basin, and changed into clean work clothes before heading back out to meet Thomas in the barn. The morning sun was fully up now, burning off the mist and revealing the full scope of the ranch. The pasture stretched out behind the barn, dotted with cattle that looked healthy and well-fed. The fences needed work in places, and Jonas mentally cataloged the repairs as Thomas walked him through the property. "Prudence does most of the garden and chicken work," Thomas explained. "She also handles the cooking, the household accounts, and half the time she's out here helping with the cattle too. Her mother died 5 years back, and she's been running this place alongside me ever since. Best daughter a man could ask for." The pride and love in Thomas's voice was unmistakable. Jonas found himself thinking again about Prudence, the way she'd looked at Dawn with her basket of eggs, the gentle way she'd spoken to the chickens, the concern in her eyes when her father mentioned his injury. "She seems like a remarkable woman," Jonas said carefully. Thomas gave him a sharp look. "She is. And she's had her share of men coming around trying to court her, thinking a ranch owner's daughter would be an easy catch. She sent them all packing. Prudence has got a good head on her shoulders and no patience for fools." The warning was clear, and Jonas nodded his understanding. He wasn't here to court anyone, he reminded himself. He was here to work, to earn his pay, to do right by the people who'd hired him. The fact that Prudence Ashford made his heart race was something he'd have to ignore. The first week passed in a blur of hard work. Jonas repaired fences, moved cattle, checked water sources, and began the process of learning every inch of the ranch. Thomas was a good teacher, patient but thorough, and Jonas appreciated his straightforward approach. Prudence was a constant presence, often working alongside them despite her father's protests. Jonas quickly realized that Thomas hadn't exaggerated his daughter's capabilities. Prudence could ride as well as any cowboy he'd known, rope a steer with accuracy, and wasn't afraid to get dirty. She also had a natural way with animals, a calm patience that made even the most skittish cattle settle under her hands. On the 8th day, Jonas was working on a section of fence near the creek when Prudence appeared on her mare, a pretty chestnut named Molly. She dismounted and approached with a canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Thought you might need water," she said, offering the canteen. "And I brought some bread and cheese." Jonas accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of how dusty and sweaty he was compared to her neat appearance. "Thank you." "That's kind." Prudence sat on a nearby rock watching him drink. "You're doing good work. The ranch looks better already." "Your father keeps things in good order, makes my job easier. He tries, but his shoulder is worse than he lets on. I'm glad you're here." She paused, then added, "I wanted to apologize if he's been gruff. He doesn't trust easily, especially after the rustlers." "He's been fine," Jonas assured her. "I understand caution. What happened with the rustlers?" Prudence's expression darkened. "They came in the night 3 months ago. 5 men, all armed. My father tried to stop them, which is how he got hurt. They knocked him down and threatened to burn the barn if we interfered. We had to watch them drive off 60 head of our best cattle. The sheriff looked into it, but they were long gone. Could have gone anywhere, probably sold the cattle in another territory." Jonas felt anger kindle in his chest. "That why you're so cautious with strangers?" "Partly. Also because my father's right, I've had men come around who were more interested in the land than in me. One even had the nerve to suggest that a woman couldn't really run a ranch and that I should marry him so he could take over properly." Her voice was bitter. "As if I hadn't been working this land my whole life." "That's foolish talk," Jonas said firmly. "I've seen plenty in just over a week to know you're as capable as any rancher I've met, man or woman." Prudence looked up at him, surprise and pleasure mixing in her expression. "Thank you. That means more than you might think." Their eyes met and held for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Jonas felt his pulse quicken, and he forced himself to look away, back to the fence he was mending. He was an employee, nothing more. He couldn't afford to complicate things by developing feelings for his employer's daughter, no matter how remarkable she was. But as the days turned into weeks, Jonas found it increasingly difficult to maintain that distance. Prudence was simply too present, too vibrant, too impossible to ignore. She brought him water on hot days, shared lunch with him when she was working nearby, and in the evenings they often found themselves on the porch after supper, talking while Thomas dozed in his chair. Jonas learned that Prudence was 23, that she'd been engaged once when she was 19, but had broken it off when she realized her fiancé expected her to give up ranch work and focus solely on being a housewife. She loved this land with a passion that matched his own love for the cowboy life, and she had dreams of expanding the ranch, buying more cattle, maybe even breeding horses. "People think women can't have those kinds of ambitions," she told him one evening, frustration clear in her voice. "But why not? I know this business. I've worked it my whole life. My father taught me everything he knows." "Then you should do it," Jonas said simply. "World's changing. No reason you can't be part of that change. You really think so, I know so. You're one of the best ranchers I've worked for, Prudence. Your gender doesn't change that." She smiled at him, and Jonas felt warmth spread through his chest. These moments were becoming the highlight of his days, these quiet conversations where they shared their thoughts and dreams. He was falling for her, he realized with a mix of joy and fear. Falling hard and fast, despite all his attempts to keep his distance. 1 month into his employment, everything changed. Jonas was riding the northern boundary when he spotted movement in the trees, too deliberate to be wildlife. He urged his horse forward cautiously, his hand moving to the rifle on his saddle. 3 men emerged from the tree line, all on horseback, all armed. "This is private property," Jonas called out, keeping his voice steady. "State your business." The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a scarred face, grinned unpleasantly. "We're just passing through, Cowboy. No need to get unfriendly." But Jonas recognized the look in their eyes, the way they were assessing him, weighing their chances. These were rough men, possibly the rustlers who'd hit the ranch before. His grip tightened on his rifle. "Turn around and pass through somewhere else," Jonas said firmly. "This land belongs to Thomas Ashford, and you're not welcome." The scarred man's grin faded. "Ashford, huh, we know that name. Had some business with him a few months back." Jonas's blood ran cold. These were definitely the rustlers. "I suggest you ride on before this becomes a problem you can't solve." "3 of us, one of you," one of the other men said, his hand moving toward his gun. "Seems like you're the one with the problem." Jonas didn't hesitate. He fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing across the valley. The horses spooked, and the men fought to control their mounts. Jonas fired again, this time close enough to the lead rider that the man's hat flew off. "Next one won't miss," Jonas said coldly. "Now get off this land." The men exchanged glances, clearly not expecting resistance. The scarred man spat on the ground but turned his horse. "We'll remember this, Cowboy." "So will I," Jonas replied, keeping his rifle trained on them until they disappeared back into the trees. He rode hard back to the ranch house, his heart pounding. Thomas was in the barn and Prudence was hanging laundry, but both came running when they heard his horse thundering into the yard. "What happened?" Thomas demanded. Jonas quickly explained the encounter. Thomas's face went white, then red with anger. "They're getting bold if they're coming back in daylight," Thomas said grimly. "We need to tell the sheriff." "I'll ride into town now," Jonas said, but Prudence shook her head. "It's almost dark. Those men could be waiting on the road. We should all go tomorrow together. Tonight we keep watch." She was right, though Jonas hated the idea of waiting. They secured the barn, brought the cattle closer to the house, and took turns keeping watch through the night. Jonas took the first shift, his rifle across his knees, every sense alert for danger. Around midnight, Prudence came out with coffee. "Father finally fell asleep," she said, sitting beside him on the porch steps. "His shoulder was hurting him again. All this stress isn't good for him." "I should have handled those men differently," Jonas said, guilt gnawing at him. "Maybe if I'd been more diplomatic." "You did exactly right," Prudence said firmly. "Those men understand strength, not diplomacy. You protected our land and probably saved our cattle. My father chose well when he hired you." Jonas looked at her in the moonlight, at the determined set of her jaw and the concern in her eyes. Before he could stop himself, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I couldn't let anything happen to this place," he said quietly. "Or to you." Prudence's breath caught Jonas. "I know I shouldn't say anything," he continued, his heart pounding. "I'm just a hired hand and you're the owner's daughter. But Prudence, these past weeks, getting to know you, I can't pretend anymore that I don't feel something. You're the strongest, most capable, most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I think about you every moment of every day." For a long moment, Prudence was silent, and Jonas feared he'd ruined everything. Then she reached up and took his hand, the one still touching her face, and pressed it more firmly against her cheek. "I think about you too," she whispered. "Every day since that first morning when you rode up and looked at me like I was something precious. I tried to ignore it, tried to tell myself it was foolish, but Jonas, I'm falling in love with you." Jonas felt like all the air had left his lungs. "You are." "Yes," she laughed softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Completely and utterly falling in love with you." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, tasting salt from her tears and feeling her hands come up to grip his shirt. The kiss deepened, and Jonas felt like he was falling and flying all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Prudence was smiling. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Well," Jonas said, trying to think clearly despite the joy flooding through him, "I suppose I should talk to your father, ask his permission to court you properly." "He'll say yes," Prudence said confidently. "He likes you, and more importantly, he respects you. That matters more to him than anything." They sat together on the porch, Prudence leaning against Jonas's shoulder, both of them watching the dark landscape for any sign of trouble. Jonas had never felt more complete, holding the woman he loved while protecting the land they both cared for. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The next morning they all rode into Challies to see Sheriff Tom Cooper. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, saloon, church, and sheriff's office, but it served the scattered ranches in the area well enough. Sheriff Cooper was a solid man in his 50s, competent if not imaginative, and he listened to Jonas's account with growing concern. "Those sound like the same men who hit the Patterson Ranch last month," Cooper said, rubbing his jaw. "Descriptions match. They're working the area, hitting isolated ranches where resistance is light." "What can we do?" Thomas asked. "Keep vigilant, keep armed, and don't try to be heroes if they do come back. Your lives are worth more than cattle." Cooper sighed. "I've sent word to the territorial marshal, but manpower is spread thin. Best I can do is ride out and check on you folks every few days." It wasn't much reassurance, but it was all they had. They stopped at the general store on the way back, and while Thomas was talking to the proprietor about supplies, Jonas pulled Prudence aside. "I want to talk to your father tonight," he said. "About us." "Is that all right?" Prudence's face lit up. "More than all right." That evening, after supper, Jonas asked Thomas if they could speak privately. Prudence made herself scarce, though Jonas caught her nervous glance as she headed upstairs. Thomas led Jonas out to the porch, settling into his chair with a knowing look. I suspect I know what this is about, Thomas said. I've got eyes, son. I've seen the way you two look at each other. Jonas swallowed hard. Sir, I know I'm just a cowboy with nothing to my name but what I can earn with my hands and my work, but I love your daughter. I love her strength and her spirit and her kindness. I'd like your permission to court her properly, with the hope that someday, if she'll have me, I can ask for her hand in marriage. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying Jonas in the fading light. Finally, he spoke. My Prudence is the most precious thing in my world, Jonas. When her mother died, she became the heart of this ranch, the reason I keep going. I've turned away more than one man who thought he could win her hand because they didn't see her for who she really is. They saw a ranch or a housekeeper or a pretty face. I see all of her, Jonas said firmly. I see a woman who's as capable as any rancher in Montana, who loves this land and works it with her whole heart. I see someone who's kind and strong and deserves a partner who respects her as an equal. That's what I want to be for her, sir, her equal partner in everything. Thomas nodded slowly. That's the right answer. And you've shown me in these weeks that you're a man of your word, Jonas. You work hard, you're honest, and you stood up to those rustlers when it could have gone bad for you. You've earned my respect, and that's not something I give lightly. So yes, you have my permission to court my daughter, and if you two decide to marry, you'll have my blessing for that too. Relief and joy flooded through Jonas. Thank you, sir. I swear I'll do right by her. I know you will. And Jonas, stop calling me sir. If you're courting my daughter, you can call me Thomas. They shook hands, and then Thomas called up to the house. Prudence, stop eavesdropping and get out here. Prudence appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with embarrassment at being caught. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was just. You were absolutely eavesdropping, Thomas said, but his tone was warm. Come here, daughter. Prudence came to stand beside Jonas, and he immediately took her hand. Thomas looked at them both, his eyes suspiciously bright. You two take care of each other, he said gruffly. And Prudence, your mother would be happy. This is a good man. The next months were both wonderful and tense. Jonas and Prudence courted openly now, stealing moments together when work allowed. They rode out to check the cattle together, worked side by side mending fences, and spent evenings on the porch talking about their future. Jonas learned that Prudence wanted at least 3 children, that she hoped to expand the ranch to twice its current size, and that she'd always dreamed of having a library full of books. She learned that Jonas had been orphaned at 14, that he'd taught himself to read from newspapers left in bunkhouses, and that his greatest wish was to have a real home, a place where he belonged. You belong here, Prudence told him one evening, her head on his shoulder as they watched the sunset. With me, with this ranch. This is your home now. But the threat of the rustlers hung over everything. They posted watches every night, and Jonas taught Prudence to shoot better, though she was already a fair hand with a rifle. Thomas's shoulder continued to trouble him, and Jonas worried about the older man's health, especially as summer gave way to fall and the work of preparing for winter intensified. In October, Sheriff Cooper rode out with news. We got one of them, he said grimly. One of the rustlers. He was drunk in a saloon over in Virginia City and got into a fight. Admitted to the cattle theft, gave up the names of his partners. We've got warrants out for all of them now. Will they come back? Prudence asked. Hard to say. They might be smart enough to leave the territory. But keep your guard up just in case. 2 weeks later, Jonas was in the barn at dawn when he heard Prudence scream. He ran outside to find her at the chicken coops, her basket dropped and eggs smashed on the ground. She was staring at the barn wall, where someone had painted a crude message in red paint. We remember you, Cowboy. Thomas came running, his face going pale at the sight. Jonas felt cold rage settle into his bones. The rustlers had been here on their property while they slept. They'd come close enough to threaten them directly. "That's it," Thomas said, his voice shaking with anger. "We're not waiting for them to make the next move. Jonas, ride to the neighboring ranches. We're forming a watch group. These men have terrorized this valley long enough." Jonas did as asked, spending the day riding to every ranch within 10 miles. The response was overwhelming. Everyone had heard about the rustlers and several had been hit themselves. By nightfall, a plan had been formed. The ranchers would coordinate their watch schedules, signal with gunshots if anyone saw suspicious activity, and come running to help each other. That night, Jonas sat with Prudence on the porch, both of them armed and alert. She was quiet, and he could feel the tension in her body. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Not for me, but for you, for my father. What if they come back and someone gets hurt? We'll be ready for them," Jonas promised. "And Prudence, no matter what happens, know that I love you. These months with you have been the happiest of my life." "I love you too," she whispered. "Jonas, if something does happen, if things go wrong, I need you to know that I want to marry you. Not someday, but soon. I don't want to wait anymore." Jonas turned to her, seeing the determination in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. Life is uncertain, especially out here. I want to be your wife, Jonas Bradley. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you on this ranch." "Will you marry me?" Jonas laughed, joy mixing with the fear and tension of the night. "I'm supposed to be the one asking that question. So ask." He took both her hands in his. "Prudence Ashford, will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner and your husband for all the days of our lives?" "Yes," she said and kissed him. "Yes, absolutely yes." They told Thomas the next morning, and he pulled them both into a rough embrace. "About time," he said, his voice thick. "When do you want to do this?" "Soon," Prudence said. "As soon as we can arrange it, before winter sets in." A week later, the circuit preacher came through Challies, and Jonas and Prudence were married in the small church with Thomas, Sheriff Cooper, and several neighboring ranchers as witnesses. Prudence wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and Jonas wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought. When the preacher said Jonas could kiss his bride, Jonas cupped Prudence's face gently and kissed her with all the love in his heart. The small congregation cheered, and Thomas wiped away tears he didn't bother hiding. The reception was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and drink. It was a simple celebration, but filled with genuine warmth and joy. As evening fell and people began to leave, Jonas and Prudence stood together watching the sunset, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. "Mrs. Bradley," Jonas said, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that," Prudence said with a smile. "Though professionally I think I'll still use Ashford. The ranch is known by that name." "Whatever you want," Jonas assured her. "You're still you, no matter what name you use." They spent their wedding night in the house, Thomas having tactfully decided to sleep in the bunkhouse. Jonas made love to his wife with tenderness and passion, discovering each other in the intimate darkness, murmuring words of love and devotion. Afterward, Prudence curled against him, her hand over his heart. "This is everything I dreamed of," she whispered. "You are everything I dreamed of." Jonas held her close, feeling more complete than he'd ever imagined possible. He'd been a drifter, a cowboy with no roots and no real home, but now he had both. He had Prudence, he had this ranch, he had a father-in-law who'd become like real family. He finally belonged somewhere to someone. 2 weeks after the wedding, everything came to a head. Jonas was on the midnight watch when he heard horses approaching fast. He fired the warning shot they'd arranged, and within minutes Thomas was beside him, rifle in hand, while Prudence barred the doors from inside. 6 riders came into the yard, and Jonas recognized the scarred leader from their previous encounter. The man pulled up his horse, and even in the darkness, Jonas could see his ugly smile. "Heard you got married, Cowboy," the rustler called out. "That's real sweet. Be a shame if something happened to your new bride." Jonas felt rage flood through him, but he kept his voice steady. "Leave now and you might make it off this property alive. Stay and find out what happens when you threaten my family." Big words for one man. "He's not alone," Thomas said, stepping into view with his rifle. And then, from the darkness, more voices called out, "Neither are we." The neighboring ranchers rode into the yard from all directions, at least a dozen men, all armed. They'd been waiting in position, alerted by Jonas's warning shot. The rustlers found themselves surrounded, outnumbered 2-1. Sheriff Cooper rode forward. "By the authority of Montana Territory, you men are under arrest for cattle rustling. You can surrender peaceful, or we can do this the hard way." The rustlers looked at each other, weighing their odds. Finally, the scarred leader spat and raised his hands. "We surrender." The sheriff and his deputies moved in quickly, disarming and binding the rustlers. As they were led away, the scarred man looked at Jonas with pure hatred. "You cost me everything, Cowboy." "No," Jonas said calmly. "You cost yourself everything when you chose to steal and threaten innocent people. What I did was protect my home." After the rustlers were gone, the neighboring ranchers celebrated their victory. Prudence emerged from the house with coffee and the last of the wedding cake, and there was a feeling of relief and triumph in the air. The threat that had hung over the valley for months was finally ended. As the night wore on and people headed back to their own ranches, Jonas stood with Prudence and Thomas, watching the sky lighten toward dawn. "You know what tomorrow is?" Prudence asked softly. Jonas shook his head. 2 months since you rode onto this ranch and found me collecting eggs at dawn. 2 months since my life changed completely." Jonas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Mine too. Best 2 months of my life." "And just the beginning," Thomas added, putting his good arm around both of them. "Just the beginning." Winter came to Montana with fierce winds and heavy snow. Jonas worked from dawn to dusk, keeping the cattle fed and safe, repairing damage from storms, and making sure the ranch operations continued smoothly. Prudence worked beside him whenever possible, though as the cold deepened, she spent more time managing the household and the books. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Jonas had worried that living in the house with Thomas might be awkward, but the older man seemed genuinely happy to have them there. In fact, Thomas's health improved noticeably over the winter, as if having Jonas to shoulder the physical work had lifted a burden from him. On Christmas Eve, they sat together around the fire and Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said simply. "To my daughter and my son-in-law, and to the future of this ranch. Your mother would be so proud, Prudence. Of the woman you've become, the man you've chosen, and the life you're building." Prudence's eyes filled with tears. "I wish she could have met Jonas. She'd have loved him," Thomas assured her. "Just like I do. You picked a good man, daughter, the best." In February, Prudence discovered she was pregnant. She told Jonas one evening when they were alone in their room, her eyes bright with joy and nerves. "A baby," Jonas whispered, his hand moving to her still flat stomach. "We're having a baby. Yes. Are you happy?" Jonas pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Prudence, you've given me everything. A home, a family, a purpose. And now this. I'm the luckiest man alive." They told Thomas the next morning, and he whooped with joy. then immediately began planning how they'd convert one of the upstairs rooms into a nursery. His excitement was infectious, and soon they were all caught up in preparations for the baby's arrival. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. The cattle had survived the winter well, and with Jonas's hard work and Prudence's business sense, they were able to buy 20 additional head to rebuild their herd. Thomas's shoulder had healed enough that he could do light work again, and the three of them worked together to make the ranch more profitable than it had been in years. Prudence's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Jonas fretted over her constantly, worried she was working too hard. She tolerated his concern with patient amusement, continuing to do what she could while accepting his help when the tasks became too physically demanding. In early August, on a hot afternoon while Jonas was out checking fences, Prudence went into labor. Thomas rode out to find Jonas, and they raced back to the house where the doctor and the neighbor women had already gathered. Jonas paced the porch for hours, listening to Prudence's cries and feeling helpless. Finally, near sunset, the doctor emerged with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Bradley. A healthy, loud son, and your wife is doing fine, though she's exhausted." Jonas rushed inside to find Prudence propped up in bed, sweaty and pale but smiling as she cradled a tiny bundle. He approached slowly, awed by the sight of his wife and child. "Meet your son," Prudence said softly. "Meet James Thomas Bradley." Jonas looked down at the red-faced infant, at the tiny fingers and the wisp of dark hair, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He's perfect. You're perfect. God, Prudence, I love you so much." "I love you too. Come, hold your son." Jonas carefully took the baby, terrified he'd do something wrong, but James settled against his chest with a small sigh. Jonas looked at his wife, at his son, and felt a sense of completeness so profound it almost hurt. This was his family, his home, everything he'd never dared to hope for. Thomas came in then, his face wet with tears. "A grandson," he said wonderingly. "A grandson to carry on the family name and the ranch. Oh, this is a blessed day." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. James was a good baby, though he had his fussy nights that left Jonas and Prudence bleary-eyed. They took turns walking him, feeding him, changing him, learning his needs and his personality. Jonas discovered a capacity for love he hadn't known he possessed, feeling his heart expand every time his son looked at him with those serious blue eyes. Prudence was a natural mother, patient and loving but not overprotective. She balanced caring for James with managing the ranch, though Jonas insisted she focus more on the baby and less on the harder physical work. They hired a young man named Peter to help with the ranch work, giving Jonas more time to spend with his family. Life settled into a rhythm. Seasons changed, and the ranch prospered. When James was 18 months old, Prudence announced she was pregnant again. This time Jonas was prepared for the waiting and worry, though it didn't make it any easier. Their daughter, Mary Elizabeth, was born in the spring, with her mother's honey-colored eyes and her father's dark hair. Thomas doted on his grandchildren, often found with one or both of them on his knee, telling stories about the old days. His health remained good, and he lived to see James learn to ride and Mary take her first steps. He was there for the purchase of additional land that expanded the ranch to 200 acres. He saw the new barn built, and the house expanded to accommodate the growing family. On a crisp October morning when James was 5 and Mary was 3, Thomas Ashford died peacefully in his sleep. They found him in his bed, looking at peace, a smile on his face. The entire valley came to his funeral, testament to the respect and love people had for him. Jonas and Prudence mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated his life. He'd seen his grandchildren, seen his ranch prosper, and had been surrounded by love until the end. It was, Prudence said, exactly how he would have wanted it. The ranch legally became theirs then, though it had really been theirs in practice for years. They ran it together, equal partners in every sense, their respect and love for each other deepening with each passing year. Jonas taught James everything about ranching and cattle, while Prudence taught Mary to ride and to love the land. But they also reversed roles when needed. Jonas reading bedtime stories while Prudence showed James how to manage accounts. When James was 8, Prudence gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Daniel and Robert. The house was full of noise and laughter, of scraped knees and bedtime stories, of Christmas mornings and summer evenings on the porch. Jonas thought often of that first morning when he'd seen Prudence collecting eggs at dawn, never imagining then how completely she would change his life. The years were not without challenges. Harsh winters, dry summers, cattle diseases, injuries, and accidents, all part of ranch life. But Jonas and Prudence faced everything together, their partnership strong and unshakable. They had arguments, certainly, passionate disagreements about ranch management or child rearing, but they always talked things through, always found common ground, always remembered that they were on the same team. When Jonas was 40 and Prudence was 37, with their children ranging from 16 to 8 years old, they took a rare evening alone together. The children were with neighbors, and Jonas and Prudence sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had on their wedding night 14 years before. "You ever regret it?" Prudence asked. "Staying here instead of continuing your cowboy life, drifting from ranch to ranch?" Jonas looked at her in surprise. "Not for a single second. Prudence, before I met you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me a life worth living, a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me everything too," she said softly. "You saw me as I really was, respected me, loved me. You've been my partner in every way that matters. I couldn't have built this ranch into what it is without you." "We built it together," Jonas corrected. "Everything we have, we made together." Prudence leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky change colors. Jonas thought about all the memories they'd collected together. The first kiss, the wedding, the births of their children, the late-night talks, the early morning rides, the 1,000 small moments that made up a life. He'd found Prudence collecting eggs at dawn, and he'd been collecting memories with her ever since. "What are you thinking about?" Prudence asked. "Us. Our life. How grateful I am for every moment of it. Even the hard moments, especially those," Jonas said. "Because we faced them together and came through stronger. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Not just the good times, but the commitment to weather the storms together." "I love you, Jonas Bradley," Prudence said. "More now than the day we married, which I wouldn't have thought possible." "I love you too, Prudence. Always have, always will." As they grew older, they watched their children grow into capable adults. James took over much of the daily ranch operation, proving to have his mother's business sense and his father's work ethic. Mary married a good man from a neighboring ranch, combining their lands and creating an even larger operation. The twins, Daniel and Robert, decided to try their fortunes in the copper mines but promised to come back to help during cattle drives. When Jonas was 55 and Prudence was 52, they officially handed over the ranch management to James, though they remained involved and advisory. It felt right, passing on the legacy to the next generation, just as Thomas had passed it to them. They had grandchildren by then, Mary's 3 children and James's 2, with another on the way. The house that had once been so quiet was again filled with laughter and chaos when the grandchildren visited. Jonas loved being a grandfather, spoiling his grandchildren with stories and treats, while Prudence taught them the same lessons she taught her own children. On a morning in late spring, when Jonas was 60, he woke early and walked out to find Prudence at the chicken coops, just as he'd seen her that first morning 34 years ago. She was collecting eggs, speaking softly to the hens, the morning mist swirling around her. Her hair was gray now, her face lined with age, but to Jonas she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. She looked up as he approached, and her face lit with a smile. "Couldn't sleep. Woke up and you weren't there. Thought I'd find you here." "Old habits," she said, setting down her basket to take his hand. "I still love this time of morning, the quiet before the day really begins." "I remember the first time I saw you doing this," Jonas said. "I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I still do." Prudence laughed softly. "You're a romantic, Jonas Bradley. Only with you." He pulled her close, kissing her gently. "Only ever with you." They stood together in the dawn light, surrounded by chickens and the morning songs of birds, holding each other as they'd done thousands of times before. Jonas thought about all the years behind them and whatever years remained ahead. He'd found Prudence collecting eggs at dawn, and he'd spent every day since collecting memories with her. Memories of love and laughter, of hard work and shared dreams, of children raised and grandchildren cherished. Memories of a life built together, brick by brick, moment by moment, choice by choice. A good life. A life filled with purpose and meaning and love. "What are you thinking about?" Prudence asked, echoing her question from years before. "Just that I'm grateful," Jonas said. "Grateful for every moment, every memory, every day with you. You made my life worth living, Prudence. You still do." "And you made mine an adventure," she replied. "Every single day an adventure." They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever this new day would bring. Behind them, the sun rose higher, burning off the mist and warming the Montana valley they'd called home for more than 3 decades. Their ranch, their land, their legacy, built on love and partnership, and the commitment two people had made to each other one autumn night long ago. The years continued to pass gently. Jonas and Prudence enjoyed their retirement, traveling occasionally to visit their scattered children, but always returning to the ranch that was their heart and home. They took long rides together on warm afternoons, worked in the garden Prudence had expanded over the years, and spent evenings reading or simply sitting together in comfortable silence. When Jonas was 68, he fell ill with pneumonia. For a week, he burned with fever while Prudence sat by his bedside, refusing to leave despite their children's urging. The doctor was doubtful, warning them that men of Jonas's age often didn't recover from such illnesses. But Prudence held his hand and talked to him constantly, reminding him of all their memories, all the reasons to fight, all the love that surrounded him. And Jonas recovered. He came back from the edge slowly, stubbornly, driven by Prudence's voice and the knowledge that he wasn't ready to leave her yet. When he was finally well enough to sit up and eat solid food, the first thing he said was, "Not done collecting memories with you yet." Prudence cried then, tears of relief and joy, holding him carefully because he was still so weak. "Good, because I'm not done making them with you." 2 years later, roles reversed when Prudence took a bad fall from her horse. She broke her hip, and at 70 years old it was a serious injury. Jonas sat by her bedside just as she'd sat by his, talking to her through the pain, making sure she took her medicine, encouraging her through the long months of recovery. She was frustrated by her limitations, angry at her body's betrayal, but Jonas was patient and supportive, never letting her give up. "We're a pair," Prudence said one day, managing a laugh despite her discomfort. "Old and falling apart. Aged like fine wine, Jonas corrected. And still together, which is all that matters. Promise me something, Prudence said seriously. When one of us does go, the other has to keep living. Really living, not just existing. Our children and grandchildren need us. Promise me. I promise, Jonas said, though the thought of life without her was unbearable. But we're not there yet. We've got more years ahead of us, more memories to make. And they did. Prudence recovered from her fall, though she walked with a slight limp afterward and couldn't ride as she used to. But she adapted, finding new ways to contribute to the ranch and family. She became the keeper of family stories, writing them down in careful handwriting so future generations would know where they came from. She chronicled the ranch's history, from Thomas's early struggles to their own years of hard work to James's current management. Jonas helped her with the project, and they spent hours sorting through old papers and photographs, reliving their life together. They found the letter Thomas had written to Jonas offering him the job, the marriage license from their wedding, pictures of their children at various ages. Each item sparked memories, conversations that sometimes lasted late into the night. When Jonas was 73 and Prudence was 70, they celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 children, 8 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. The house was packed with family, 3 generations of Bradleys and Ashfords, all descended from the marriage of a wandering cowboy and a ranch owner's daughter. James stood to give a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who showed all of us what love really means, what partnership really means, who built this ranch with their own hands and raised us to carry on their legacy. Everything we are, everything we have, we owe to you. Thank you for your love, your example, and your endless commitment to each other and to all of us." Everyone raised their glasses, and Jonas looked at Prudence with tears in his eyes. "Did we do all right?" he whispered. "We did better than all right," she whispered back. "We built something beautiful." As they grew into their mid-70s, Jonas and Prudence both began to slow down noticeably. They didn't venture far from the house anymore, content to watch ranch operations from the porch and to spend time with visiting family. They had good days and bad days, but they faced each one together, just as they always had. On a cool September morning, Jonas woke to find Prudence still asleep beside him, which was unusual. She was usually up at dawn, old habits persisting despite her age. He reached over to wake her and found her hand cool to the touch. She'd passed in her sleep, peacefully, the small smile on her face suggesting pleasant dreams. Jonas sat for a long time, holding her hand, unable to fully process that she was gone. 46 years of marriage, 47 years since he'd first seen her collecting eggs at dawn, and she was gone. The woman who'd been his entire world, his partner, his love, his reason for everything. The family came, and there was crying and grieving, but also celebration of Prudence's remarkable life. Her funeral was attended by half the valley, testament to the woman she'd been and the impact she'd made. They buried her next to her parents on the hill overlooking the ranch, and Jonas stood by her grave long after everyone else had left, talking to her the way he'd done every day of their life together. "I promised you I'd keep living," he said quietly, "and I will. For our children and grandchildren. But God, Prudence, I miss you already. I'll miss you every day for the rest of my life." In the weeks and months that followed, Jonas struggled. The house felt empty without Prudence, even with family constantly checking on him. He went through the motions of living, but the joy had gone out of everything. His children worried, gathering to discuss what to do. It was his great-granddaughter, little Prudence, named after her great-grandmother, who finally reached him. She was 6 years old, bright and curious, and she climbed into Jonas's lap one day with a picture book. "Great-grandpa, will you read to me?" she asked. "Mommy says you tell the best stories." Jonas looked down at her upturned face, so like the Prudence he'd loved, and felt something stir in his heart. His wife would want him to be there for this child, for all his descendants. He'd promised her he'd keep living, really living. "I'd love to, sweetheart," he said, opening the book. "Did I ever tell you about the time your great-grandmother and I caught a runaway bull?" Little Prudence's eyes widened. "Tell me everything." And Jonas did. He told her stories of the ranch, of adventures and challenges, of love and partnership. Over the following months, he found himself telling stories to all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, keeping Prudence's memory alive through the tales of their life together. He also finished the family history project she'd started, writing down everything he could remember, adding his own perspective to her carefully documented facts. The work gave him purpose, and slowly, the crushing grief eased into something gentler. He still missed Prudence every moment of every day, but he could think of her now with more smiles than tears. He could celebrate the life they'd had rather than just mourning its end. Jonas lived to be 78 years old, 3 years after Prudence's death. In those years, he saw 2 more great-grandchildren born, attended James's 30th anniversary celebration, and saw Mary become a grandmother herself. He finished the family history and gave copies to each of his children, ensuring the story of the ranch and their family would be preserved. On a spring morning, much like the one when he'd first arrived at the ranch 51 years before, Jonas woke with a sense of peace. He got up, dressed carefully, and walked out to the chicken coops where he'd first seen Prudence. The morning mist swirled around his feet, and he could almost see her there, young and beautiful with her basket of eggs. "Been collecting memories with you, my love," he whispered. "What a collection we made." He walked back to the house, sat in his favorite chair on the porch, and watched the sun rise over the land he'd worked and loved for more than half a century. When James came to check on him an hour later, Jonas had passed peacefully, a small smile on his face, joining the woman who'd been his entire world. They buried Jonas next to Prudence on the hill, and the entire family gathered to celebrate his life and mourn his passing. But there was comfort in knowing he and Prudence were together again, and that their legacy lived on in the ranch and the family they'd built. James took over the family history project, adding the story of his parents' final years. He made sure every descendant knew the story of Jonas Bradley, the wandering cowboy who'd found love and home with Prudence Ashford one dawn morning when she was collecting eggs. He made sure they knew about the partnership, the love, the commitment that had built not just a successful ranch, but a family legacy that would endure for generations. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, and later under his children's leadership. The Bradley Ashford Ranch became one of the most respected operations in Montana, known for quality cattle and ethical business practices. But more than that, it was known as a place built on love, where family came first and where the values of hard work, integrity, and partnership were passed down from generation to generation. Years turned into decades, and the story of Jonas and Prudence became family legend. On the 100th anniversary of their first meeting, their descendants gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were over 50 family members present, spanning 5 generations, all descended from the cowboy and the ranch owner's daughter who'd fallen in love at dawn. They stood on the hill by Jonas and Prudence's graves, and James's grandson, who'd inherited the storytelling gift, recounted the tale for the youngest generation. "He found her collecting eggs at dawn," he said, "and he spent the rest of his life collecting memories with her. Memories of love and laughter, of hard work and shared dreams, of children raised and challenges overcome. They showed all of us what real love looks like, what true partnership means, and they built this ranch and this family on those values. We're all here today because two people met one morning 50 years ago and chose to build a life together based on love, respect, and commitment. As the family dispersed to explore the ranch and share their own stories, a young woman stayed behind at the graves. She was Jonas and Prudence's great-great-granddaughter, 22 years old and recently graduated from college. She'd been feeling lost, uncertain about her future, but standing here listening to the family history, she felt something click into place. She looked out at the ranch spread below, at the house that had sheltered 5 generations of her family, at the land that had been worked with love and dedication for over a century. She thought about her great-great-grandparents, about the life they'd built from nothing but hard work and love for each other. "Thank you," she whispered to the graves, "for showing us what's possible when two people really commit to each other and to a dream, for building something that lasts, for giving us this legacy." The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant sounds of cattle. Somewhere on the ranch, chickens were clucking in their coops, morning routines continuing as they had for generations. The young woman smiled, feeling connected to her heritage in a way she never had before. She understood now that Jonas and Prudence's real legacy wasn't just the ranch or even the family. It was the example they'd set, the values they'd lived by, the love they'd shared that had rippled out through generations. Every happy marriage in the family, every partnership built on mutual respect, every commitment to hard work and integrity, all of it traced back to that dawn morning when a cowboy found a woman collecting eggs and decided she was worth staying for. As the sun climbed higher in the Montana sky, burning off the morning mist just as it had for over a century, the young woman turned to rejoin her family. She carried with her the story of Jonas and Prudence, the memory of their love, and the inspiration of their example. Their story wasn't just history. It was a living legacy that would continue to guide and inspire their descendants for generations to come. The ranch house stood strong and welcoming, expanded and updated over the years, but still recognizably the same place where Jonas and Prudence had raised their family. Inside, the sound of laughter and conversation filled the rooms as family members shared meals and stories, connected by blood and by the values passed down from that first generation. On the mantel in the living room sat a photograph, carefully preserved and displayed in a place of honor. It showed Jonas and Prudence on their 25th wedding anniversary, standing in front of the barn with their children and grandchildren gathered around them. Jonas's arm was around Prudence's waist, and they were both smiling at each other rather than at the camera, lost in their own world as they so often were. The love in their expressions was unmistakable, as fresh and real as it had been on their wedding day. Beneath the photograph was a small plaque with an inscription that James had commissioned shortly after his parents died. Jonas and Prudence Bradley, he found her collecting eggs at dawn. He spent his life collecting memories with her. Their love built this family and this ranch. May we always remember and honor their example. And they did remember. Through the generations that followed, the story was told and retold, adapted and embellished, but never losing its essential truth. It became more than just a story. It became the foundation of family identity, a reminder of who they were and where they came from. Young couples in the family, facing the inevitable challenges of marriage, would remember Jonas and Prudence and their unwavering commitment to each other. Parents struggling with the demands of raising children would recall how Jonas and Prudence had balanced ranch work and family life with grace and humor. Grandparents would tell their grandchildren about the great-great-grandparents who'd built the ranch, keeping the memory alive and relevant. The chicken coop still stood, rebuilt and modernized over the years, but still in the same location where Jonas had first seen Prudence. Sometimes, on misty mornings, family members would look out and swear they could see two figures there, a young woman with a basket and a cowboy watching her with love in his eyes. It was probably just tricks of the light and wishful thinking, but it was a comforting image, a reminder that some loves truly are eternal. The ranch continued through boom times and difficult periods, through droughts and abundant years, through changing economies and evolving technology. But through it all, the values Jonas and Prudence had established remained constant. Hard work, integrity, respect for the land and animals, commitment to family, and above all, love. These were the pillars on which the ranch and family stood, and they proved strong enough to weather any storm. As the sun set on the 100th anniversary celebration, the family gathered one last time on the front porch of the ranch house. They stood together, multiple generations united by blood and legacy, looking out at the land Jonas and Prudence had loved so well. The oldest family member present, Jonas and Prudence's daughter Mary, now 95 years old, raised her glass in a final toast. "To my parents," she said, her voice still strong despite her age, "who taught us that love isn't just a feeling but a choice you make every day. Who showed us that the greatest legacy you can leave is a life lived with integrity and commitment. Who built this family on a foundation of love that has proven unshakable. May we always honor their memory by living the values they embodied. To Jonas and Prudence, to Jonas and Prudence." The family chorused, raising their glasses. As the stars began to appear in the darkening Montana sky, the family slowly dispersed, heading to their various accommodations or beginning long journeys home. But each person carried with them the warmth of family connection and the inspiration of a love story that had lasted not just a lifetime, but had rippled through generations. The ranch settled into quiet as night fell. The cattle were bedded down, the chickens roosting in their coops, the horses dozing in the barn. The house lights gradually went out until only the porch light remained, a beacon in the darkness just as it had been for over a century. And if you listened very carefully on that quiet Montana night, you might have heard, carried on the wind, the echo of two voices. A man and a woman, talking and laughing together, sharing the comfortable conversation of two people who knew each other completely and loved each other unconditionally. The sound of a cowboy and his wife still collecting memories together, even beyond death, their love a permanent part of the land they'd cherished. The story of Jonas Bradley and Prudence Ashford was complete, a circle closed, a life fully lived. From that first dawn meeting to their final resting place on the hill overlooking the ranch, they had built something extraordinary. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a legacy of love that would endure as long as there were people to remember and honor it. He had found her collecting eggs at dawn, a moment that had seemed so ordinary but had changed both their lives forever. And he had spent every day after that collecting memories with her, building a treasury of shared experiences that had enriched not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. It was, in every sense, a love story for the ages. A testament to what two people could build when they truly committed to each other, when they chose love every single day, when they worked as true partners toward common dreams. Jonas and Prudence's love had built a ranch, raised a family, and created a legacy that would continue for generations. And on quiet mornings in Montana, when the mist rises at dawn and the world is still and peaceful, If you visit the Bradley Ashford Ranch and stand by the chicken coops, you might just feel their presence. Two souls who found each other against all odds and built a life that mattered. Two people whose love story became legend, not because it was extraordinary in its elements, but because it was extraordinary in its commitment, its depth, and its enduring power. That was the final truth of Jonas and Prudence's story. They were ordinary people who chose to love each other extraordinarily well, and in doing so, they created something that would last forever. Their names were carved on headstones on a Montana hillside, but their real monument was the family they'd raised, the values they'd instilled, and the love they'd shared so generously that it continued to nourish their descendants generations later. The story was complete, the circle closed, the legacy secured. Jonas Bradley had found his home, his purpose, and his great love on a Montana ranch one dawn morning. Prudence Ashford had found her true partner, the man who saw her as an equal and loved her for exactly who she was. Together, they had built something beautiful and enduring, proving that the greatest adventures in life aren't found in distant places, but in the choice to build a life with someone, to face each day together, and to collect memories that will last not just a lifetime but echo through eternity.